I have inherited a collection of doilies and tablecloths, handmade by my mother's family over generations. They're so beautiful, they're so delicate, they're so gentle, they're like snowflakes. Some people might look at these and think, what a waste of time. I don't. I think they're works of art. And I look at them and I also see a kind of structural creativity where you visualize something that doesn't exist yet, and then you make choices so you can get there. Someone chose this pattern, chose the materials, stitched it all together, laid it out properly, which is exactly what I do when I'm plotting and planning my books. In my second video, I explained how I go through a spring stage of writing novels, where it's all about the ideas, the colourful, exciting planning and plotting stage. It's when I develop characters, nail down the plot, and write great big 40-page synopses to give me a guide to work from when I sit down to produce the actual manuscript. In a funny sort of way, that planning stage is like crocheting a doily in my mind. Another metaphor for this process would be quilting. In Nova Scotia, where my husband comes from, quilting is a very big deal, and I bought several quilts in Nova Scotia. I adore quilts. I think they're the old masters of handicrafts. They're absolutely beautiful, and they're testament to so much painstaking creative energy. Choosing the colours, choosing the patterns, arranging the pieces, adding the quilted designs. I'm in awe of people who do this. People like Jean Murphy and Jean Hagen. They were neighbours of my brother-in-law when he was living on Prince Edward Island, which for Australian viewers is the Anne of Green Gables Island. Apparently, the pattern here is Chrysalis Star. And this pattern is called Flower Baskets, for obvious reasons. It was made by a distant cousin of my husband, a MacDonald of Prince Edward Island. There's another way of looking at the planning process. It's like building a drystone wall. Drystone walls are very careful, painstaking and quite creative structures because there's no mortar involved. You have to choose your stones very carefully and fit them together like a jigsaw puzzle so that they form a strong, cohesive structure. And if that isn't a metaphor for bolting your scenes together, I don't know what is. There are a lot of drystone walls in Leura. You see them everywhere you go. I even have one in my own garden, but it obviously wasn't made by experts. In fact, I think it's held together by roots at this point. Stones keep falling out of it. The reason drystone walls are part of the Leura visual tapestry is pretty much down to a man named Paul Sorensen, a famous landscape designer who lived and worked in Leura from 1920 to 1983. He had a big influence on the Leura landscape, and he was a huge fan of drystone walls, as you can see when you visit his most famous Leura garden, the Everglades. The Everglades were designed and planted by Sorensen in the 1930s for a rich Sydney businessman named Henry Vandervelde. Apparently the whole thing was a very difficult job, requiring an immense amount of labour, but the results are so worth it. When I wander through this garden, the thing that really strikes me is how much planning went into it. There's a narrative to the way the garden unfolds in front of you. It's leading you quite deliberately from happy, sunny, organised scenery to mysterious mazes, which isn't entirely different from the way you organise a book. You can see Sorensen has carefully considered every single view and vista and how it can be enhanced. Sometimes you're faced with a choice of paths. Which is also a very common occurrence for me when I'm plotting. Shall I go this way or that way? Something else that's strikingly apparent is how much Sorensen liked mystery and the element of surprise. You're always rounding corners and stumbling on things. In fact, there's a kind of climax to your wanderings, just the way there is in a novel, because at the end of the walk, there's the grotto. It's hard to believe that this grotto was entirely constructed by Sorensen. The stream was created, pipes were installed, all these stones were very carefully laid. It's an astonishing achievement. The manufactured stream passes through an area called the Glades, which further demonstrates Sorensen's structural abilities. You can always finish your visit to the Everglades with coffee and cake at the tea rooms in the old Vanderveld house. but I've decided to go somewhere else today. For a very long time, when Paul Sorensen was working around Lura, he had a nursery here on the corner of Herbert Street and Poplar Avenue. That's since been sold off and subdivided, but his glass house still remains as a beautiful cafe with an attached garden. The paths in this garden are quite curious. They take you up and down, winding back and forth, which would make sense if they were paths between rows of plants for sale. Now they're just a lovely way of putting a lot of mystery and acreage into a smallish plot. It's funny how this is kind of behind the scenes Paul Sorensen. No drystone walls, no dramatic surprises. Everything has a fairly pragmatic quality. It makes me think of the work that went into somewhere like the Everglades, which was just the tip of the iceberg. Like a finished book. It's the end result of so much plotting and planning. Which is something you should remember when you sit down with any book, not just mine. Anyway, happy reading.